And the day my parents tried to sue me was the same day I realized I was never truly their daughter, just a backup plan that finally outlived its use. I'm Chloe Martine, 35 years old, founder of a software startup that was recently acquired for $4,800,000, 0 cents. It should have been the happiest moment of my life. Celebration, champagne, and maybe even a phone call from my mom just to say she was proud. Instead, I got a knock on my door and a summons. Their lawyer had the nerve to hand me a letter claiming I owed my family reparations for building my company without acknowledging the values and sacrifices they'd given me. As if missed birthdays, constant comparisons, and decades of emotional neglect were somehow investments expecting ROI. I stood there, clutching the papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My heart didn't break. It locked itself in a vault. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter and started being my own person. Before the betrayal, before lawyers and courtrooms, before my mother's cold signature on a certified envelope, I believed in us, in my family. Or at least, I believed in the version I kept building in my head. We lived in a small, snow-dusted town in Vermont. Maple trees lined our street, turning fire red every fall before shedding their leaves like quiet prayers. Our house was modest, a two-story colonial with creaky floorboards and an old fireplace that smoked more than it warmed. But it felt like home. It felt like ours. As the firstborn, I was the center of their world, at least for a while. My mother, Susan, used to sing lullabies to me even after I'd outgrown them. My father, Mark, built me a wooden treehouse in our backyard with a crooked ladder and a secret compartment where I kept all my treasures, a plastic tiara, a broken compass, a note Lily scribbled in crayon that said, "I love Chloe." Lily was born when I was 6. I still remember the night Mom told me we were going to have a baby. She took my hand and laid it gently on her growing belly. "You're going to be the best big sister in the world," she whispered, and I believed her. When Lily came into our lives, I adored her instantly. She was tiny and loud and needed everything. I gave up my room so she could have the one with more sunlight. I taught her how to tie her shoes, how to braid her hair, and how to lie about eating vegetables. When she got the flu one winter, I skipped my school's spelling bee finals just to stay home and hold her hand. Thought that's what love was, giving and giving and giving. In middle school, I joined the science club and won a regional robotics contest. The trophy sat on our kitchen counter for exactly 2 days before being replaced by Lily's participation ribbon for a dance recital. "She worked so hard," Mom said, smiling at the ribbon like it was Olympic gold. Dad ruffled my hair. "You're tough, Chloe. You don't need the spotlight." Maybe I didn't, or maybe I just learned not to expect it. In high school, I started working weekends at a local bookstore to save for college. Lily, meanwhile, got a car for her 16th birthday, a used Volvo, but still, it had a red bow on it and everything. I used to ride my bike in the rain to get to work, while Lily drove past waving. Still, I didn't feel angry, not then, just resigned. I thought it was my job to be dependable, to be the one they didn't have to worry about. When I got into NYU's business program, I was the first in our family to be accepted into a top-tier university. I ran into the kitchen, waving my acceptance letter, breathless with excitement. Mom barely looked up from her grocery list. "That's great, sweetie. Just don't forget to send in Lily's college apps, too." I kept calling home every week after I moved to New York. I sent postcards, care packages, Christmas gifts on a student budget. I never missed a birthday. I mailed Lily handwritten notes during her exams. Sometimes I wouldn't even get a reply, but I kept giving. I kept reaching out. My grandmother, Evelyn, Mom's mother, was the only one who truly saw me. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old books. She used to say, "You've got a fire in you, Chloe. Don't let anyone smother it, not even family." She told me stories about starting her own catering business in her 40s and how people doubted her every step of the way. "You remind me of me," she'd whisper, when no one else was listening. She was the one who taught me how to make lemon scones from scratch. She was also the one who taught me that not all love is unconditional. Some people only love what they can control. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant, but I would one day, looking back, I see how desperately I wanted to earn their affection. I believed that love was something I could secure if I just worked harder, sacrificed more, and stayed quieter. I didn't realize I was offering up pieces of myself in exchange for something that should have been mine all along, belonging. But you can't negotiate your way into someone's heart if they've already closed the door. At first, it was little things, subtle, quiet. Like when mom bought Lily a brand new bike for her 9th birthday, a sparkling pink cruiser with a white basket and glitter tassels. I had gotten mine secondhand from a neighbor. The brakes squealed, the paint was chipped, and the seat was duct taped. When I asked why Lily got a new one, mom said, "She's more sensitive about that sort of thing." Or when we'd watch movies as a family and Lily always got to pick. Always, even when it was my birthday. I'd sit there pretending to enjoy a princess musical while everyone else sang along. I told myself it didn't matter. But over time, the small things started piling up. On family vacations, they'd plan the itinerary around Lily's interests, her favorite museums, restaurants, and places to shop. When I once suggested a hiking trail I'd researched, Dad glanced at Lily, who scrunched her nose, and said, "Let's not bore your sister, Chloe." When I made the honor roll every semester in high school, my parents barely noticed. No cards, no dinner out. But when Lily got a B+ in pre-calc, they treated it like she'd discovered a cure for cancer. "She worked so hard," Mom beamed. "We should celebrate." During holidays, I'd spend hours helping Mom cook, set the table, and decorate. Lily would show up 15 minutes before dinner, throw on some lip gloss, and be showered with compliments for looking so grown up. Once, when I asked Dad why no one noticed my efforts, he replied, "You've always been responsible. It's expected." Expected, like love was a salary, not a gift. College widened the gap. I worked 2 jobs and applied for scholarships to stay afloat. My parents sent Lily spending money every month, even though she lived at home. They'd call me only when they needed help editing her essays or buying her something online. Not to ask how I was doing. The worst was the silence. Birthdays passed without calls. I once sent my mom flowers for Mother's Day with a handwritten card. She texted back, "Thanks, Lily says hi." That was it. When I landed my first real job in San Francisco, I called to share the news. "It's a startup," I said proudly. "There's real potential here." Dad's response? "Just don't let it interfere with your sister's wedding planning. You promised to help." I hadn't promised. I'd merely said I'd try. I flew home for that wedding, spent a week assembling DIY centerpieces and managing spreadsheets for seating arrangements. I gave a toast, I smiled in the photos, I stayed late to help clean up. They didn't even thank me, but they did frame a photo of Lily and her husband alone on the living room wall, right above the fireplace. When I eventually founded my own company, I told them hesitantly, hoping for some kind of pride, some spark of joy. Instead, Mom said, "That's risky. What if it fails?" Then added, "Lily's thinking of going back to school. Can you help with her tuition?" Even when I succeeded, I was useful, never celebrated. It didn't stop at money, it was my time, my emotional energy. Once when I was recovering from surgery and asked if they could visit, Mom said they were too busy helping Lily with her nursery remodel. "We'll come next month," she said. They never did. Friends noticed, "Why do you keep trying?" My college roommate once asked after I cried over a forgotten birthday call. "They don't see you, Chloe." She was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it. So I kept showing up, I kept calling, sending gifts, sharing updates. I thought, maybe, just maybe, if I became successful enough, kind enough, giving enough, they'd finally see me. But they never looked, not really. The imbalance wasn't just emotional, it was institutional. They had written a family trust years ago, one I wasn't even told about until much later, and it named Lily as the sole beneficiary for simplicity. When I asked about it, Mom laughed like I'd asked to borrow $1 million. It's not about fairness, she said. It's about practicality. You're doing fine. And that sentence, that assumption that I didn't need them, became their excuse for everything. Eventually, I stopped asking why. I just learned to expect less. And that in itself was the deepest wound of all. The betrayal didn't come as a scream, it came as a whisper inside an envelope. It was my 34th birthday. I'd just returned from a quiet dinner with a few close friends, still wearing the bracelet Alex gave me, a delicate gold chain with a charm that said built, not given. I was tipsy on wine and laughter when I noticed the certified letter tucked in the mail. The return address is my parents' home in Vermont. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe they remembered. Maybe it was a birthday card, an attempt at reconciliation. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stiff, cream-colored paper. My mother's handwriting is precise and cold. Dear Chloe, it began, after careful consideration, your father and I have decided to update our estate plan. All assets, including the family home and retirement funds, will be transferred to your sister, Lily, as she is raising a family and in greater financial need. This decision is both logical and fair. You have achieved considerable success on your own, and we trust you will understand. No happy birthday, no love, Mom and Dad, just, we trust you will understand. I couldn't. I stared at the letter for what felt like an hour, every word slicing deeper. It wasn't about the money. I didn't need it. It was the message underneath. You're not family. Not really. Not where it counts. I called Alex. I couldn't get the words out. Just heavy breathing, then a choked whisper. They left me out of the will. Alex didn't hesitate. I'm coming over. When he arrived, I handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. Chloe, he said finally, this isn't just unfair. This is cruelty dressed as logic. A week later, I flew home, not to confront them. I told myself I needed closure, that I could talk it out, find a reason for the unreal. When I arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Faded shutters, a sagging porch. But inside, everything was the same. Mom's teacups, Dad's recliner, Lily's wedding photo by the fireplace. My picture was nowhere. Mom greeted me with a tight smile. Oh, you didn't need to come all this way, she said. It's really not a big deal. Not a big deal? I held up the letter. You disinherited me without a conversation. Dad appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. We just did what made the most sense. You're successful, Lily's struggling. She's always struggling, I snapped. And I'm always the solution, right? They looked away. No apology, no regret. I would have understood if you told me, I said quietly. But to send a letter on my birthday, it wasn't intentional, Mom replied. We were just getting our affairs in order. As if that explained everything. I left without staying the night. I remember driving back to the hotel, hands gripping the wheel like it was the only solid thing in my life. But that wasn't the end. 3 weeks later, they showed up at my condo in San Francisco, unannounced. Lily and her husband, Brian, were with them. Their faces are tight, serious. We need to talk, Mom said, stepping inside before I could answer. The conversation that followed felt surreal. They'd read about my company's acquisition in a business magazine. They congratulated me, then asked for money. Specifically, they asked for 1/3 of my earnings. It's only fair, Brian said. Family supports the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After years of being ignored, dismissed, replaced, now they wanted a piece of the life I built without them? I owe you nothing, I said. You promised to take care of us if you ever made it big, Mom claimed, pulling out a folded piece of paper. It was a note I'd written in college, a thank you for a loan, where I'd mentioned hoping to repay them someday. That was a sentiment, not a contract, I said, stunned. Lily began crying. We're going to lose the house. I'm pregnant, Chloe. With twins. My chest tightened, not from guilt, but from deja vu. Every crisis, every plea always led back to me fixing everything. I'm sorry, I said, but this is manipulative. Brang stood and will sue. And they did. A week later, I received legal notice. They were suing me for breach of verbal contract, claiming I'd promised financial support to the family in exchange for their emotional investment in my success. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The betrayal broke something fundamental. It wasn't just about money, it was about rewriting history, pretending they'd been part of something they never supported. Hired a lawyer, Greg Wilson, sharp, calm, and experienced. He read the complaint, then looked me in the eye. "This is disgusting," he said, "but we'll fight it." And because I was done being the silent one. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling until the sun began to rise. I kept hearing my mother's voice, flat, unapologetic. "You're doing fine," as if that absolved her of everything. I remembered something Grandma Evelyn once told me when I was 15 after my mom forgot to attend the school debate where I took first place. "Some people withhold love like it's currency. They make you beg for scraps and then blame you for being hungry." I didn't understand it then. I thought she was just being dramatic. But now it hit like prophecy. Every family has its cracks, but mine was built on quiet fractures, moments I dismissed, red flags I painted white. I thought if I just kept proving myself, one day they'd be proud. One day, they'd choose me too. Instead, they chose the narrative where I owed them everything, even though they'd given me nothing but silence when it mattered. I wasn't just grieving the betrayal, I was grieving the illusion of family I had clung to for far too long. The lawsuit broke something in me that I didn't even know was still whole. I'd always been resilient. I had swallowed disappointments, smiled through dismissals, and built an armor of competence. But this was different. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. My own parents were trying to rewrite my life story as if I hadn't earned any of it. I stopped sleeping. My body felt wired and heavy all at once, like I was constantly bracing for an impact that never came. The nights were the worst. Dark, silent, full of ghosts. I'd lie awake for hours, heart racing, every possible outcome of the case looping through my brain like a broken reel. Would they win? Could a court believe their lies? I stopped answering calls unless it was Greg, my lawyer, or Alex. I stopped going out. My team at the office noticed. I missed deadlines, snapped at interns, burned through coffee and Advil like it was survival fuel. I was unraveling, privately, the way I'd learned to fall apart without making a mess. One morning, I sat in the shower for over an hour, water gone cold, watching it pool around my feet like I might just vanish with it. That scared me, not because I was suicidal, but because I felt nothing, just a blankness where my ambition used to live. That same week, I got a call from a local reporter who had picked up the court filings. "Would you like to make a statement?" she asked. I almost laughed. A statement? What could I say? That my family was suing me over imaginary promises and weaponized guilt? I hung up. Then I called Alex. He didn't ask how I was. He just said, "Come over, I'm making soup. You don't even have to talk." I went, sat on his couch wrapped in a blanket while he stirred something that smelled like garlic and comfort. When he finally sat beside me, I said the thing I hadn't said to anyone, not even myself. "What if they're right?" Alex turned to me, eyes wide. "Chloe, what if I really am cold? What if I really am cold? What if I did leave them behind? What if success changed me more than I realized?" Stop. His voice was calm but firm. "You didn't change. You grew. They just refused to grow with you." Tears came then, hot and relentless. "I just wanted them to be proud," I whispered. "I know," he said, "but you don't have to bleed for their approval." That was the night I decided to get help. Not legal help. I already had that. I needed help surviving the emotional fallout. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Winters. She specialized in family trauma. In our first session, she asked me to describe my parents in 3 words. I said, practical, distant, She nodded. "Now, Describe yourself without using your words. I opened my mouth and realized I couldn't. It hit me harder than any court document. I had spent so long trying to earn love, I didn't know who I was without the effort. Therapy wasn't a magic fix. It was messy, slow. Some weeks I left feeling raw and worse than when I came in. But slowly the numbness started to thaw. I started journaling again, cooking, walking without earbuds in. I remembered Grandma Evelyn's lemon scone recipe and spent an afternoon trying to get it right. The smell made me cry, but I kept baking. At the office, I pulled my team into a meeting and told them the truth. Not all the details, but enough. I'm dealing with a personal legal matter, I said. It's been affecting my focus, but I'm here and I'm not giving up on what we've built. They nodded, one intern even teared up. That moment reminded me that I had built something real, something meaningful, something no one could take from me, not even the people who gave me life. One night, I pulled out an old photo album from college, pictures of me before the business, before the headlines. I saw a girl with messy hair and tired eyes, but a spark in her smile. She looked brave. I missed her. That's when it hit me. I hadn't lost everything. I still had me. A little cracked, a little tired, but still standing. I didn't know how the lawsuit would end, but for the first time in weeks, I believed I'd survive it, not because I was invincible, but because I was finally allowing myself to be human. Healing doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, like morning light under a heavy curtain. At first, it was small things. I started sleeping more than 4 hours a night. I stopped checking my email before brushing my teeth. I bought myself fresh flowers for no reason other than they made my kitchen look less like a war zone and more like a home. Dr. Winters encouraged me to make a list of things that grounded me and made me feel alive. Cooking, long walks, handwritten letters. I kept the list on my fridge and tried to do at least one each day. It wasn't about productivity anymore, it was about presence. At work, I stopped pretending. I told my leadership team what was happening. Their response stunned me, not with pity, but solidarity. One VP quietly admitted he was estranged from his father too. Another shared how her sister tried to sue her over their mother's estate. We bonded in that raw space where pain was no longer a secret. With Greg's help, we began building our defense, not just legally, but narratively. He encouraged me to collect everything: emails, old texts, birthday cards from Grandma Evelyn, notes from Lily where she called me the strongest person I know. Slowly, we stitched together a tapestry of truth that was bigger than their claims. But the real transformation came from clarity. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't trying to fix the narrative. I was living in it, unfiltered. My life, messy and miraculous, was mine. I started going to networking events again, not because I needed investors, but because I wanted to reconnect. I gave a talk at a Women in Tech conference titled, "What They Don't Teach You About Boundaries." It went viral. Emails poured in from strangers who had been cut by the same blade. One message stood out. A young entrepreneur wrote, "You made me feel less ashamed for walking away from people who only loved the version of me they could control." I cried reading it, not out of sadness, but recognition. Then something unexpected happened. North Star Technologies, a major software firm, reached out. They had followed my company's growth and were interested in an acquisition. At first, I hesitated. Selling felt like giving up. But after a week of consideration, I realized it wasn't surrender, it was strategy. We negotiated for weeks. I brought Alex into the room for support. Greg handled the legal side. I pushed for guarantees, job security for my team, funding for expansion, and the ability to retain creative control during the transition. When the deal closed, it wasn't with champagne and headlines. It was with a quiet moment on my couch, the contract signed, the future wide open. The number was life-changing, enough to never work again if I chose. Chose to work anyway. Because now it wasn't about proving anything. It was about building what I wanted, how I wanted, with people who saw me. With part of the proceeds, I started a foundation under Grandma Evelyn's name. The Evelyn Initiative would offer grants and mentorship to women from difficult family backgrounds who wanted to start their own businesses. I wanted them to know they didn't have to be born into support to deserve it. Lily reached out around that time, a short email. I heard about the sale. Congrats. Can we talk? I hesitated, but healing had made room for boundaries, not walls. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our cities. She looked older and tired, but less performative. She apologized not just for the lawsuit, but for years of silence. I let them control the story, she said. Even when I knew better, I didn't forgive her on the spot, but I listened. That, I realized, was the power I had now. I could choose what stayed and what didn't, what I carried and what I let fall away. Later that evening, I walked through my neighborhood just as the sky turned from gold to indigo. Kids rode bikes, someone grilled burgers, a dog barked at nothing. For once, the world felt quiet in the best way. When I returned home, I lit a candle, lavender and cedar, and sat on the floor with an old journal. I wrote one sentence. I am no longer trying to earn peace. I am living in it. And somehow that felt like the beginning of everything. The courtroom didn't feel like justice, it felt like exposure. Everything I had worked so hard to protect, my image, my privacy, my carefully built distance, was now under fluorescent lights and legal scrutiny. My family's narrative, twisted and weaponized, was laid out like a bad script, and I had to sit there stone-faced while they performed. Lily cried on cue. My mother dabbed her dry eyes with a handkerchief she likely chose to match her blouse. Brian nodded solemnly as their lawyer described me as estranged, entitled, and emotionally detached. They called my success the result of family values instilled over decades. It would have been laughable if it didn't hurt so much. Greg remained composed. His voice never rose. His questions were surgical and precise. He dismantled their claims piece by piece. When they presented the handwritten note I'd once sent thanking them for a small college loan, Greg countered with bank statements, scholarship records, and emails proving they'd contributed less than $500, 0 cents to my education. We presented statements from my mentors, colleagues, and even Alyssa, who testified about my early years in business, the countless nights I spent coding in a freezing apartment, and the years I worked without a salary. We showed how the company grew from nothing, literally nothing, into a respected name. And Greg introduced something unexpected, Grandma Evelyn's will. Not just the financial part, but a letter she had written to her attorney before her death, explaining exactly why she left everything to me. In it, she spoke of my integrity, my independence, and her concerns about my parents' manipulative tendencies, especially my father's history of gambling and my mother's denial. The courtroom was silent. Then came the twist. Greg produced a prior lawsuit my parents had filed against a second cousin who'd won a state lottery years earlier. They had claimed a verbal agreement in that case too, using nearly identical language. It had been settled quietly, and they'd received a payout. Pattern of behavior, Greg said simply. This isn't about family, it's about opportunism. Their lawyer tried to object, the judge overruled. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't cry, I didn't plead, I simply told the truth. I was raised to believe that if I just worked hard enough, gave enough, forgave enough, I would finally be seen. But it was never enough, not for them. And when I finally built something for myself, they didn't celebrate. They saw it as theirs to claim. I looked at my mother. You didn't lose me to ambition, you pushed me away with your conditions. And I looked at the judge. This isn't just a case about money, it's about autonomy, about refusing to be manipulated, even by the people who raised you. The judge didn't deliver a dramatic speech. She simply said, the plaintiff's claims are unfounded, and in this court's opinion, brought in bad faith, case dismissed. But to me, it felt like thunder. Outside the courthouse, Greg shook my hand. You did more than defend yourself today, he said. You reclaimed your story. The press didn't pick it up, no headlines, no scandals, and that's how I wanted it. The real victory came days later when I received an envelope from the court with a formal dismissal and a note from the judge. Just one line, handwritten at the bottom. Your strength was evident, may peace follow. It brought me to tears. That weekend, I booked a short trip to Big Sur. No laptop, no schedule, just me, a journal, and the Pacific. I stood on the cliffs and let the wind undo everything that had tried to knot itself around my chest. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just exhaled, had survived the storm, and now it was my turn to choose the weather. That Sunday, Alyssa organized a small gathering at her apartment. No celebration, she insisted, just tacos and wine with people who knew the whole story. My team came. Greg showed up briefly with his wife, who hugged me like an old friend. Diane sent a bottle of ridiculously expensive champagne with a note, not for the company you built, for the woman who wouldn't let them tear her down. Lily didn't reach out, neither did my mother, but a distant aunt sent a text that read, I'm sorry for what they put you through. Your grandma would be proud. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I spent that evening around a fire pit with people who had shown up, not because they had to, but because they chose to. We toasted marshmallows and told stories. At one point, someone asked, What now, Chloe? I sipped my drink. I think I'm going to start over, I said. Not from scratch, just from truth. And I meant it. The Monday after the ruling, I returned to work with a different kind of energy. The fear that used to hum under my skin like static was gone. I started restructuring my company, not because I had to, but because I wanted to build something that matched who I was now. We created new parental leave policies, started a mentorship program for first-gen college students, and began donating 5% of our profits to trauma recovery organizations. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was shaping something better. Then, one morning, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. It was from Lily. Emma, it began, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know. I knew it was wrong. I let them convince me you owed us something, because the alternative, that we owed you an apology, was too painful to face. It ended with, if you ever want to talk, I'll be here, no pressure, just the door open. I stared at the letter for a long time. I didn't know what the future held between us, but I knew this. I wasn't angry anymore, not like before. What I felt now was grief, not for what was lost, but for what never existed. A family that saw me. But the beauty of rebuilding your life is that you get to decide who your family becomes. And I was just getting started. A week passed before I responded to Lily's letter. I didn't call, I didn't write back. I showed up. We met at a quiet little park between our cities, the same one where Grandma Evelyn used to take us to feed ducks. The bench under the oak tree was still there, though older now, paint peeling at the edges like everything from our childhood. Lily sat, already waiting, hands folded in her lap, a diaper bag next to her, and a half-full bottle tucked into its side pocket. She looked up, startled when she saw me, then stood, unsure. Hi, she said, voice small. Hi, I replied, sitting down beside her. Silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile. She reached into the bag and pulled out 2 photos. One of her twins, another of us as kids in Halloween costumes. I was a witch, she was a fairy. Grandma stood behind us, laughing. I found these last week, she said. I almost threw them out. But you didn't, I murmured. No, she said. Because despite everything, part of me still remembers the way you used to hold my hand at the grocery store when mom got impatient, how you read me stories when I had chickenpox. I closed my eyes, letting the memory wash over me. I wasn't always kind to you, she admitted, even before the lawsuit. I envied you, still do sometimes. Why? I asked, genuinely confused. Because you got out, she said, voice cracking. You figured out how to build something real. I just followed the rules and waited for things to feel right. They never did. I didn't know what to say, but I reached over and touched her hand. Slightly. She squeezed back. I'm not asking for anything, Lily said. Not money, not some perfect sisterhood. I just want my kids to know their aunt isn't the villain they've heard about. I looked at her, really looked. For once, not through the lens of betrayal or rivalry or pain. Just a woman, a mother, a sister trying. I can do that, I said softly. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked them clear. We didn't hug, we weren't there yet, but it was something. Later that evening, I returned home to a message from Greg. He'd finalized the structure of the scholarship fund I wanted to name after Grandma Evelyn. The first round of recipients had been chosen, young women from underserved communities, all with dreams of tech careers, all with something to prove. One girl reminded me so much of myself at 19, it hurt. Her essay had ended with, "No one believes I can do this, but I do, and maybe that's enough." I whispered her words aloud, smiling. Maybe that's enough. I forwarded the message to Alyssa, who immediately replied with a string of heart emojis and an invitation to Sunday brunch. That Sunday, surrounded by friends who had become family, Nathan, Greg, his wife Alyssa, and her kids, I finally felt something I hadn't in years. Rooted, not floating, not surviving, not defending, just here. As we toasted to new chapters, I looked around and realized the most powerful thing I'd ever built wasn't my company. It was this life, quiet, chosen, whole, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, for holding space, for letting me tell a story I once believed no one would care to hear. I used to think survival was the same as strength, that if I could just keep moving, keep building, keep achieving, the past would eventually lose its grip on me. But I've learned that real strength isn't about what you outrun. It's about what you turn to face. It's setting boundaries even when they make you the villain in someone else's story. It's choosing peace over approval, even when that means losing people you once loved. It's knowing your worth doesn't come from bloodlines or balance sheets, but from the quiet truth you carry inside. You are enough as you are. If you're reading this and wrestling with guilt for walking away from people who made you small, please hear me. You're not selfish. You're not broken. You're just someone who finally chose themselves. That takes courage, the quiet, everyday kind, the kind that doesn't always get applause, but changes everything. And if you're still in it, still navigating the ache of rejection or the weight of shoulds, know this: there is life beyond the grief. There are friendships that feel like family. There is love that doesn't ask you to shrink to be held. There is space for you exactly as you are. And someday, when you've built your own piece brick by brick, you'll look back and realize the approval you were chasing, you never needed it because you've been worthy all along. Thanks for walking with me. I'm rooting for you. Always.